Welcome to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michelle Kawamoto Perry. In every episode, we explore how people from educators and artists to executives and entrepreneurs lead with authenticity, rise through adversity, and share the wisdom they've gained along the way. Today's guest is Carissa Phelps, an attorney, author, filmmaker, and survivor of child sex trafficking who has transformed her lived experience into a remarkable career of advocacy and systemic change. In 2012, Carissa published her memoir, Runaway Girl, Escaping Life on the Streets, One Helping Hand at a Time, which introduced the world to her personal journey and gave a voice to countless others with similar experiences. Since then, she's founded Runaway Girl organization, spearheaded litigation to hold corporations accountable for ignoring trafficking, and continues to advocate for survivors to receive justice and resources through the Survivors First Collaborative. Carissa's story is one of resilience, courage, and leadership born from survival. I'm honored to welcome her today. Carissa, thank you so much for being here on Expressions of Leadership.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
So I'd like to begin with your personal story. You've been open in sharing that you are a survivor of child sex trafficking. Can you take us back to that part of your journey and what it meant for you to survive it?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of sharing that part of my story and why I had at the time that I did, which was almost 20 years ago, is that it was an experience that I didn't understand fully. I knew that I had been kidnapped by a pimp. I knew that I had been forced into selling my body, and I was 12 years old. I knew that all those things were true, but there weren't words to talk about it. There wasn't a justice system that addressed it. I was considered, the out of control youth who ended up getting arrested in that situation and taken to juvenile hall at 12 years old. And so I told my story, and I went back to those streets to tell my story, to share my story in a film, which was Carissa, that was my name, Carissa, filmed by David Savage is how you would see it. But we went back to those streets, found people who were involved in the trafficking, told my story. And the purpose of telling my story was really about finding out myself, where I belonged in the world. There was a lot of talk about authenticity, showing up who you were, and a very much more than imposter syndrome that I felt walking the halls of UCLA and the law school, and also at business school with my MBA at UCLA Anderson. And so going back to tell my story wasn't a celebration to say, oh, look, I've made it. This is great. It was more of a journey, an introspective journey to just find out who I was and be on a level ground and feel like I belonged. And not only did I find out I belonged, but I had a message to share that was important for many more people who were still suffering.
And at what point did you begin to see yourself not just as a survivor, but as someone with the capacity to lead?
So I knew growing up, I mean, this is something that when you're on the streets and people, you're surrounded by people who have different, varying levels of needs. I would take care of a lot of people, even at a very young age. And so in taking care of people, I had to anticipate their needs. In anticipating people's needs, I kind of had a natural position of, being the one that people would follow. That was from a very young age. In my family, in my household, it was similar as well. I was not seen as necessarily you would call me a leader, but I definitely was the one that was very loud with my grievances. I let that be known when I thought things were not just, when I thought things were not fair. And I oftentimes found myself protecting people who were more vulnerable than I was. And I was vulnerable, but I would find myself protecting others. I think in that way, leadership sort of became part of my identity, and it became part of my survival mechanism too. Because if I was out front And if I was in the lead, then I wasn't being taken to places that I didn't want to go. Um, and so that was, even though I didn't make the best decisions, I didn't have all of the resources that I could have had, that was really important to me. And then when I did end up back in school, after 3 years off of school, seventh, eighth, and ninth grade, I did end up being the student body president of my continuation high school. And the reason why was because we had no student body. And why did we have no student body? Well, if we had no student body, we had no field trips that we can go on. We had no fundraisers we could do. We had no activities. So in wanting those activities for us at our school, our little one trailer, continuation school, I formed a student body and I became the student body president. And so that was really how I showed up for leadership, was that there was typically some injustice I saw, something that was unfair that required leadership.
Now, going back to your story, when did you realize that your story could make an impact beyond yourself?
So we, had at the time, this is around 2003, 2004, a leader in this country in Oprah Winfrey. Like, she was the person who spoke to not just women, but I think a large portion of our public. She was a very public voice about this authenticity and being yourself. And she was, watched and worshiped by so many people. And I just remember one day, it was after a pretty bad breakup of a 5.5 year relationship that I was coming to terms with, okay, who are you? Who are you standing alone? Who are you in the midst of all of this? Who are you and what are you going to be? And I had a sense and a feeling that I was ready to share my story publicly. I didn't know why, but suddenly I said, it's time to call Oprah. And it just came to me that, like, that was the thing to do, because that was the thing to do then, was, you were going to share your story. It was on Oprah. I did not go on Oprah. I have friends that did, and may not have been the highlight of their experience. So I'm not sure if I really wanted to or not. No offense, but it was something that other people did and I didn't do. I didn't go out publicly. Instead, I created a story. And that's something we see more nowadays, right? We see people who are able to take their own story in their hands and be creators, be able to craft, what they are sharing, and not just in memoirs, but now on video and podcasts on YouTube. And I could say that I was on that frontier. We went with high-end cameras that were considered heavy equipment nowadays, right? Lighting, things like that. And we went and made a film about my story. And that's how it started. It was before my book, before my memoir. We went back to the streets, we went back into the juvenile halls, and that's truly, in those juvenile halls is where I realized that girls were still suffering. Girls were still out there, that the social workers, as great work as they were doing, weren't able to solve all the problems. The government, wasn't able to get the resources and services where I think they belonged, and that it needed help. It needed stories like mine, not only mine, but like mine, to help improve it.
And after doing this documentary, you wrote a book, Runaway Girl, Escaping Life on the Streets, One Helping Hand at a Time. How did that shape your perspective on your past and your purpose?
So when I wrote, it was like a gestation period. I don't know how to say it else any other way, right? Like, the book was inside of me, and it's a feeling I'm beginning to feel now, where it's like, it's due. Oh no, it's overdue. Oh, it has to come. It had needs, and I've never, gone full term in a pregnancy, but I know this feeling was like that it was just going to be born. And so, how it was going to be born, where it was going to be born, how it was going to be received, all of those things. Some of them we have control over, and some of them we don't. So, what I learned about myself during that process was, one, that I was a writer, that I enjoyed writing, that I wanted to write, that I had a voice, and that even though I worked with a co-writer, somebody who had experience in, cover to cover finishing these types of projects, I had a voice and it needed to be heard. And so I was champion of that voice, and I was the only champion of that voice. And it was important to me that the girls, the people who picked up the book, and especially the girls who were living the life that I experienced, that they saw themselves on those pages, that they heard themselves in my voice. And so I really needed to get my voice into those pages, and that was important. It was important to my editors at Viking as well. I had an agent. I had the whole thing. It was a whole birthing team, and it was wonderful. But then how people received it, how we did media, all of those things, it became it. I sort of became part of a machine, of the publishing world, and in that I learned that my voice extended beyond sharing my story, that my voice is also about, my marketing plan, the way that I could have done it if I had gone on some of the shows like Dr. Oz that was asking me to be on, and I was being pulled back. No, don't go because your book's not out yet. It was like these wrestling matches. And so, you know, I heard from a younger friend recently, that when she listens to women who speak about their experiences, a lot of them say, trust your intuition. And I think that's a part of it. I intuitively knew what I needed to do to get my book out. Um, but then I don't want to say I was silenced because that's too harsh to say about the people who were in that world. At the time, the publishing world was changing so rapidly, and they were operating by a set of rules that applied at that time. And the reason I say all of this is because I think my book was meant to be a bestseller. I absolutely believe it. I believe everyone should read Runaway Girl. I think it's a book that everyone needs in their hands, and I need to release it again to give it another chance. Because that's where I learned about myself in terms of, I'm not necessarily the boss at these big places, and I don't run the show, but I got to where I was because of my instinct, because I knew how to stay alive in some of the worst situations. And then I need to trust myself when it comes to business and other decisions as well. So that was really, I think that could be interesting for a lot more people than you expect, because I don't know, it's an experience that I'm continuing to write about and think about. I knew my story. I wasn't going to relearn my story by telling my story. But this whole process, I learned this process.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about the Runaway Girl organization and how Carissa turned her survival into systemic change. Stay with us. We'd love for you to be a part of the Expressions of Leadership community. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. This is Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michelle Kawamoto Perry, joined by Carissa Phelps, author and advocate for survivors of human trafficking. Let's get back to our conversation. Carissa, what inspired you to start the Runaway Girl organization?
I think being one voice is lonely and also ineffective. So being one voice, it could feel really good at first. It could feel like, oh, you're the one and you're the survivor and you made it and it's so great. But when you start looking around, or even, you need some company in terms of understanding what's going on and processing things. It's really good to have a community. And at the time, the community of survivors was pretty small and fragmented. It was people here, people there, people with different ideas. And it seemed like we all wanted the same thing, which was justice for survivors, a space for survivors. And so I took this analogy of like a pencil. You could break one pencil really easily. And if we had 10 or even 5 pencils, 10 pencils, 12 pencils, it's much harder to break us. And I started building up Runaway Girl with that idea. And it was not about me being at the top of this organization, like some pyramid. It was very flat. And I wanted it to remain flat. I wanted people to come into the organization knowing that they could trust their authentic voice, who they were, and that they had something to contribute to this work. And that's what I built. And that was what Runaway Girl was all about.
What have you found to be the primary challenges of leading an organization rooted in lived experience?
I think there is nothing harder than being an entrepreneur besides like being on the streets and all the other, in terms of a business choice, a career choice, being an entrepreneur. I think I learned later, over 70% of people who are entrepreneurs who come from all sorts of healthy backgrounds experience moderate depression and more severe depression even. So being an entrepreneur is not an easy gig at all. So I much would have preferred, an entrepreneurship where I was nurtured somewhere and then let into the world. But I chose not to be a nonprofit because at the time, again, at the bleeding edge at that time were social entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurship. It was something I learned about and advocated for in my law and MBA education. And so I felt like I needed to do the social entrepreneurship route, which gave me a lot more leeway in terms of how I built my contracts for training, how I paid my trainers, who I answered to were survivors. I didn't answer to anybody else. They were basically the people that I answered to, and then the people who wanted our trainings from our survivor group and our consulting really. Not that they didn't have a say, they definitely had a say in what they wanted and how they would contract with us, but they didn't necessarily dictate our script or tell us what we were going to say or exactly what we were going to train on. They needed the information that we had, and then how we got it to them was all of our dealings. So that was a lot of freedom inside of that. I was blessed with that. I blessed a lot of other people with that model to be able to build that model for themselves and build up, seven-figure businesses. It was great. At the same time, I think, Twitter was just getting going when I was getting my book out, and it was a different time. It was a hesitancy to like want to be on that scene. Did I want to live my life in this like two-dimensional box where people were judging me and sort of back in that space? I couldn't do it, and I resisted something that I think could have unleashed a huge amount of success for the company, but I resisted it because it felt harmful at the time. It felt exploitative if I put survivors out there, especially if they were still vulnerable, right, into that space. Um, then, of course, 2020 happened. We were at the peak of getting, major contracts coming in, and things were happening, and things shut down. It also coincided with me filing my first lawsuit. So you could say there's a little conspiracy theory there of like, people wanted to shut me down, but I don't think so. I think it's just things shut down. And so we had to take a step back from a lot of the in-person trainings that we did. Found Zoom early. We were already using Zoom before everybody was using it, but it was something that we, wanted to do, aspired to do. And then you saw this rush of funding coming in, which you would think is a good thing. Funding from foundations, funding from government dollars. This is going towards human trafficking. That was all built on the advocacy that we did, that when there was no funding. And then once there was funding, oh, forget about it. Like everybody had a training, everybody had something, which was great. And I was like, okay, this means that Runaway Girl maybe doesn't need to be at the front anymore of this work. Then I went to work full time, refocusing and allowing others to run Runaway Girl, and it became much more of an organization that supported entrepreneurs, supported survivor entrepreneurs who had unexpected challenges, like we all do, come up and needed that support. And so the revenue for Runaway Girl is being like rediscovered. How do we do this again? How do we rebuild again? Especially now that we're seeing this pulling back of funding, BOCA funding, um, it funding that was there before this disappearing. It's kind of the place that I have a niche and where I could shine is when we start to get in a deficit again in terms of resources. So, yeah, Runaway Girl is a challenge. It's a struggle, but it's built for times like this. That's what I could say.
And looking back at when you started it, where it is now, what do you see as the most important leadership lessons that you learned from building Runaway Girl?
Trust is a currency. Relationships are a currency. Of course, currency is currency. Money helps too, but the biggest thing is respecting and honoring the people who make contributions to your organization in whatever way that is. If that's being a trainer, a contributor, if it's being a client, and really understanding that everybody is a part of your ecosystem of your business.
And leadership often requires some sort of risk. Can you share a moment when you had to take a bold step and what you learned from that?
They're not my proudest moments because they're oftentimes filled with fear and doubt, even years after you make the decision. There is a sad thing that happened. I mean, to me, it's sad. I don't know how to explain it any other way. But at the time, when I made the decision, I thought it was the right decision. You couldn't have told me it was the wrong decision. You could have, lectured me, shown me every book on, what was the right thing to do. And I made a decision to pull from an event, to not speak at an event because another speaker was put on the agenda who had hurt or caused some pain to a survivor. That was with me on my team too. She was there. And so my protectionism, like my wanting to protect this survivor kicked in. And I focused on, again, the survivor and not on business deal that I had, the agreement I had to go and do this presentation. And I can't say it was my proudest moment because, so many things were revealed later, years later, about, just trauma. And I understand trauma, but in the moment, you couldn't have told me that this person didn't do this person wrong, It's years later, I'm going to find out that this person maybe was hurt, but that hurt maybe didn't stem from this person. And I don't know how else to say it. I can't give you all the names and who it was and everything, but I could say it was a tough decision, but I should have made the even tougher one, which would have been to go on anyways. And I didn't. I didn't. And I didn't have the chance to reforge a relationship with this other activist. She was not a survivor, but she was an activist in the movement. And she was later diagnosed with a terminal illness, and we lost her pretty quickly. And then everything goes into perspective, like super fast, right? So I know she forgives me. I know that life goes on, beyond this place and space that we're in. But yeah, that was a tough decision, but I should have made the tougher one.
And what did you learn in retrospect?
I think that, again, putting everything into perspective and ourselves included, our feelings could get the best of us. Our feelings, they could feel very righteous, like anger, especially, right? We could have some righteous anger. We could have some feelings about wanting to protect the more vulnerable people in this world and in our lives. But sometimes it can get the best of us. And so that was my learning, my lesson.
Let's take a brief pause. When we return, we'll dive into Carissa's work in the courtroom and how she's used leadership to take on powerful institutions. Want to support powerful conversations on leadership and success? Expressions of Leadership is looking for sponsors who believe in the power of great storytelling. Let's team up. Email us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com to learn more. You're listening to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michelle Kawamoto Perry, and I'm joined by special guest, Carissa Phelps. As you mentioned earlier in the interview, you received your JD and your MBA at UCLA. How do you use your background in both law and business to shape survivor-led change?
So again, I didn't expect to live this long. I mean, I just had a birthday the other day, and I was like, never expecting to live to 16, to 18, to 21. And then I'm going and I'm like, okay, what am I going to do that makes an impact, that makes a difference? And going to law school, I learned that I could major in anything, and math I loved. So I excelled in math, did my undergrad in math, graduated with a perfect GPA in mathematics, loved math. Could have easily gone on through math and made some major changes now that we're seeing in this world, right? With large language models, all the things that use vector algebra, all these things I could have done with just my math brain. So again, just going with the thing you love. If anybody's out there right now, just stick with the thing you love. At the same time, I also had this heart for justice. And so I had seen all these justice fighters that were lawyers, including Ralph Nader, Nader's Raiders, like changing the whole automotive safety industry there. I dreamed of, McDonald's having healthier food in all these areas where McDonald's were popping up everywhere. I had this sense that there was this corporate, sort of decision making that could be influenced by law and lawyers, helping them make better decisions. And so some of that would be through lawsuits, right? Some of it would be adversarial, some of it would be through legislation. And so, yeah, law seemed like a natural fit for me. Um, and I went into law school and had the opportunity to add an MBA because I had the math background. And the MBA was really about understanding capitalism. Because at the time, coming from, not, a family that did not always have enough to put food on the table, um, I needed to understand how could there be so many big deals out there with so much money and so many billions, now we hear trillions all the time of dollars that were in circulation and were being made or used or leveraged and nothing available to eat for families. Like it just didn't make sense to me. So I wanted to make it make sense, capitalism and how it worked. And going and adding my MBA did that. It certainly did that. It opened my eyes to private equity and venture capitalism and just in industry and innovation. And a lot of my friends felt like I was joining, well, I wouldn't say my friends, a lot of people who were in public interest, more in those avenues, felt like it was a betrayal and that I was maybe going to the dark side. And when I was there, when I was in my MBA program, it was a joint program between law and business. And so I went in my third year over to the MBA, and I made friends who will be my friends for the rest of my life without effort, without judgment, and without effort. And I did make friends in law school too, but this was different. I can call on my friends for my MBA program, and they are happy to open doors to, they know me. It just was a different experience because in law school you're in an adversarial group and you're on a bell curve, the way you're graded, and everyone is judging themselves against everyone else. In business school, if you did not work together, you did not get it done. And so it was a totally different experience for me at business school. And I saw a lot of light there. I saw a lot of hope. I saw social good, coming about. In the end, it was an experience where I made relationships that will last forever. And the people I think that are going to be the biggest change makers in throughout this next generation experienced me, they experienced my story, and they need to experience more people like us, right? More people who have survived, so that when we're there at Congress or we're there in a corporate boardroom, we're not just a visitor, we're not just a story to be told or you know, a show and tell day. We're part of it, right? And they got to see that and experience that. And I would never give up that experience. And those two experiences shaped everything I would do moving forward.
You've spearheaded landmark litigation against entities that ignored signs of trafficking. From a leadership perspective, what does it take to stand up to such powerful institutions?
Well, one is to, sort of understand that people in those positions could have made different decisions. So if I didn't believe that, like in my core, I could not hold them accountable. If I thought they couldn't make any other decision, like this was the only thing they could do was run businesses like this, they would have never been able to offer hotel accommodations, for instance, without trafficking going on. Then I might have felt bad, or I might not have been able to bring the litigation. But I knew that there were other decisions that they could have made, things they could have done in their own leadership, things they could have done throughout their company that wouldn't have been just talking about trafficking on the news to make people happier and make customers happy, but really would have been about creating change, creating culture change. And some companies chose to do that and did it well, and not perfectly, but I think did it well and set the standard. And this is the same thing with supply chains in businesses, supply chains in companies, right? People could just sign off on a clean supply chain, or they could really know what their supply chain is. And I think holding people for that to that sort of accountability is because I understand what leadership can do in either direction, bad or good.
Building a movement requires bringing many voices together. What leadership practices have you found most effective in uniting survivors, allies, and policymakers?
I think I was in a class recently where they talked about the brain and the heart in Chinese medicine is like one entity. And so it's not separated. And I think so many times we try to separate it. We do our best to try to separate it, which actually is a diagnosable disease like cognitive dissonance, right? Like it could lead to mental illness if we separate these things for too long. So having our heart and our mind connected when we're making decisions, it is typically received, if not well, at least with some, patience and kindness in the interim when people are trying to figure things out. I have been hit by, doors being slammed in my face, being told to go to the other room. You don't belong in here. You belong, downstairs in the basement with the other survivors, not in the room with the attorneys and judges. But, I've had all of those things happen too, but I typically show up, heart and mind connected. And to me, that's the most important thing. And that's if someone is angry at me and wants to slam the door in my face, and also if someone is in pain and they're crying out and they're saying, listen, I can't do anything except sell my body. That's the only thing I can do. That's the only thing I understand. That's the only thing that I'm meant to do. This is what gives me joy. This is what gives me pride. This is what gives me, and I face that person with the same compassion and kindness. I never judge for someone who's making decisions in their life that are the most difficult, maybe decisions they've had to make. Um, I don't do that. And so I think coming at it with heart and mind connected allows you to like not just come in with your rhetoric, not just come in and shut people down, but instead remain open.
Leadership often comes with setbacks. Can you share a moment when progress felt out of reach and how you found the resilience and maybe even the courage to keep leading forward?
If we're doing this right, we're reaching every day. We're not feeling content because there are millions of people who are suffering today, who are being trafficked, who are being lured into trafficking, who are being held. So in this work, we rarely get a chance to say, oh, yeah, I did it. I ended trafficking today. Um, to feel sort of satisfied is the rare thing. To feel like this is, success is the very rare thing. And so we have to celebrate each other. I had a survivor tell me today after a sort of consultation call working on some things for Survivors First. She just ended the call and she said, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being here. You're doing an excellent job. And so just that we don't get very much. And so being able to remember that, like the setbacks are sort of almost normal. I'm going to cry, but the setbacks are almost normal, and the rewards are very few.
Carissa, you've spent significant time in the courtroom. What does leadership look like in that space for you?
So as a kid, I was in the courtroom with shackles on my arms and my legs, and I was shackled to another kid, and we were in orange, and that was all meant to, so we couldn't run away when we were being taken to court. But we were lined up, and we would be given our sentences, and we would be told ahead of time, by our probation officer or our public defender what our sentences were going to be. So we kind of already knew, but we didn't have any argument in it. We didn't have any say, and we had no voice. We weren't even kids. I mean, we were criminals with our, we were tiny criminals. Um, so going back in the courtroom was a big deal for me. It was scary. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. There's times I still see judges or hear from judges and I get nervous or say the wrong thing. I think one time in court I said, instead of like your honor, like Lord or something. Like I just, like like my Lord, like I don't know, it was something outrageous, and it was just so funny to me because it puts it in perspective. Like this is how I feel. I almost feel out of body when I'm in these spaces. And I promise myself, I'm like, okay, if I go to court every day, I'm gonna get an assistant dog, and they're gonna tell me when I need to walk out of court, because it could be so, you have so much deference to the judge. The judge has so much authority, so much decision power in there, and you are a part of the court as an attorney, and you're advocating for your client. So I've gone into the courtroom as an expert, and that is like almost the worst position to be in. And that's why experts get paid, I'm sure, big bucks, right? You're an expert, you're getting questioned by all sides, and you have to have all the answers. So as an attorney, you have a little bit more power in that position. And so it's owning that power that was difficult for me, and really understanding I had a voice. A lot of my hearings happened for me during COVID time. So they were like telephonic, not even video. A lot of the judges were resisting even Zoom then. So we would, they didn't get to see me, but they got to hear me. And it was it's a learning experience. It really is a learning experience. But I think I finally have come to the place where I'm very comfortable and I could feel confident in front of a judge, and also ask for, sort of guidance from that person instead of feeling threatened or afraid when you're going into court. So that's a funny thing, because I think a lot of people think about attorneys and they think everyone's just like a natural CSI, go to court, sort of whatever show, Law and Order they're watching, right? Go to court, fight it out. But we're not all suits. We're not all, cut out like that for attorneys, where a lot of us want to be the ones behind the scenes, thinking of the strategy, thinking of the, what's the trial strategy? What are your questions? What are your issues? And fighting for justice in that way.
We've just heard how Cadissa's turning her experience into advocacy and accountability. After the break, we'll explore the personal side of her leadership. Don't go anywhere. Leadership isn't just about strategy, it's about people. The Forward Project helps organizations cultivate strong, adaptable leaders who create thriving workplace cultures. If you're ready to invest in your leadership team, visit www.theforwardproject.co to learn how. This is Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michelle Kawamoto Perry, joined by Carissa Phelps, filmmaker and fierce advocate for systemic change. Carissa, leading in advocacy spaces can be emotionally taxing. How do you take care of yourself?
So being by the water has been especially good for me. The vastness of, a large body of water that has so much more power than I can ever hold is important. It's an important reminder of who I am. I guess some people could get that feeling by being around tall buildings or large, mountain sides, but I feel that way around a large body of water. So for me, it puts things in perspective, just like a night sky with stars and when you could see the galaxy, right? It's like perspective. And that's part of the self-care. I think, being somebody that is conscious about working out and getting my energy out has been really important. Taking care of myself with journaling and sort of checking in has been important. My faith has been central because even when everything else seems to be running foul or miss, it's like this is the one thing that I could come back to and understand and feel confident about is my faith. And so that's grounding and important to me. And I feel like the faith portion of it brings me to my relationship. So my relationship with my husband, my relationship with my family, my relationships in general, all are stemming from my faith, from what I believe. And I believe we're all connected. I believe we're all part of this one body of Christ and that we could do better. So I try. I don't always perfect it. I'm not perfect, but in that, I think I try to take care of myself and others. Sleep has been really important. I don't know if anybody talks about that or talks about that enough, but especially when there's so many things that could be on our mind, right? On our minds. It's like if I sleep, then I regenerate myself and I'm able to focus again and do better. So
And what boundaries have you learned to set as a leader and also as a survivor?
boundaries are interesting because they're so healthy, but they came at a time and learning to set them came at a time when I was trying to understand also what it meant, right? It was like I needed them, but I also didn't know exactly what they meant. I hadn't had them as model of it growing up. Boundaries to me meant like pain, it meant prison, it meant, cutting somebody off. It seemed so harsh. And so to learn about boundaries, in a different way when you need them too at the same time as that you need them is hard. That was a whole chapter of my life understanding that. And I think it's an internal process. A lot of times people want to make boundaries about, what I say to other people or how I say it to them. It's really about internally. And I think my mom taught me that really very young, that the things people say to you can't hurt you unless you let them, right? And so I just sort of repackaged that in my adult life and understood that, if somebody's not like here physically hurting me, then where am I letting them in, right? What do they say? Like, am I giving them rent, right? Free rent in my head, like free rent in my heart, am I letting something torment me that I need to set the boundary on in terms of what I let in. And that to me I have a lot more control over that than I do about what people say or what they do, is how I respond to it.
You're doing very difficult work. Have you ever thought about stepping away from it?
I think about it every day. I mean, would it be healthy if we didn't know that there was an alternative? Would it be a choice that I'm here if I didn't know there was an alternative? I think that I learned I cannot remember which leader said it. It might have been Steve Jobs, but it was like asking himself every day. And I can't remember. For some reason, I pictured in the shower. He might have said like in the shower every day, ask yourself, is this what I want to be doing today? And, a couple days in a row could be very normal to say, yeah, this sucks, but I'm going to do it because I have this obligation. But once it gets to like 4 or 5 days in a row of not wanting to be there and wanting to be doing something else, then it's time to do something else. And I've had that time and I've done a sabbatical before. And I highly recommend checking in with yourself and people doing sabbaticals and taking care of themselves. It is okay to take care of yourself all the time, 100% of the time. So that's my feeling, my sentiment about it. If it goes longer than 5 days, then we're going to take some time off.
And what brought you back?
So when I went on sabbatical, I got to see amazing things happening when I was gone, and that was great. So friends were going to DC, they were changing laws, FOSTA SESTA came online, like there was this national movement to end online sex trafficking, which brought us to this place where we have the Backpage Remission Fund today. But people were doing things and it was okay. And I was like, this is great. This is wonderful. And I don't have to be a part of everything to make things happen. And I loved it. I really did. And I got to spend time with my mom before she passed away and heal in that relationship. And I had no idea I was going to lose her the next year after my sabbatical, but that's how it happened. I took it at the right time. Going back was just as natural as the first time that I started. It was. And this more recently, when I left my law firm job and I went, came back here, I took some time as well. And so that time also, learning, growing, seeing where I fit in, taking classes, understanding, more of the sort of whole ecosystem that trafficking is happening in now. All of that was very important time for me to be able to do what I do now.
And what have survivors taught you about leadership that no classroom or degree could?
If you are going to lead, you are going to experience pain. Pain like you never thought you'd experience. Pain and loss and disappointment and it will feel like someone has ripped your heart out at times. If you pour yourself into something, if you pour yourself into someone, there's no doubt that you will end up at some point being either disregarded or discarded. And when that happens, I think that's when we really have to decide, and what am I here for? Am I here for this person to love me? Am I here for this person to like me? Or am I here to make a change?
We're going to take one last break. And in our final segment, we'll talk about Carissa's vision for the future, the legacy she hopes to leave, and end with some wisdom and whimsy from our guest. Don't go anywhere. Don't miss a thing. Follow Expressions of Leadership on your favorite podcast app and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. This is Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michelle Kawamoto Perry, joined today by Carissa Phelps, a global voice for survivors and systemic change. Carissa, you've been part of a global shift in how trafficking is understood and addressed. Where do you see this movement headed in the next decade?
I hope we learn from the past. If we do not learn from the past, then we are setting ourselves back once again because of this new fourth industrial revolution of AI technology, Web3, blockchain, this whole new world that is being digitized. We can be a part of it. Survivors can be a part of shaping it. We don't have to wait and see how many people are hurt this time in order to stand up and have a voice. This goes for survivors who have been harmed by social media, by gaming addiction, by trafficking online, trafficking in life, in person. All of us can take a part and take a role in shaping what is a new way of doing business, a new economy, and we can be a part of it. We can also capture some of it for ourselves. Like that is something that survivors have not seen before in this generation of survivors. We have not had an opportunity like this before, where we can actually capture some of this opportunity and some of this wealth and then go on and share it with our families and generations to come so that we're not operating from these deficits or begging for dollars to come down to our organizations so that we can do good work. So I think, this combination of opportunity to not do the same types of harms as Web 2 and a previous industrial revolution that was built off of slavery, to do actually good, to do good in this next iteration is our choice. And really it's something that we have to not ask for, not beg for, but just do.
So if you could redesign one system, education, justice, healthcare, or maybe law enforcement, which would you start with and why?
I think it would have to be education. I think education, it's not that it's broken. It's not that it needs complete redesign. It's that it is an ever evolving system that has to remain accessible. And we have new tools for learning, new tools that can be integrated into, more comprehensive, more I would love to say like education that applies to the real world. So I think that education, it's not that, again, it's not that it's a broken system, but that it's a system that constantly needs redesign in order to address all the issues in the justice system, in the law enforcement system, in the healthcare system. It all stems back from education. At some point, education may have lost its way. And I know there's a huge push to say, education lost its way in one direction. I don't think that's where I go with it. I think education might have lost its way in answering too much to corporations, too much to financial institutions, and maybe not enough to its core values and beliefs in innovation, in true opportunity and innovation. And that, to me, education and accessible education for everyone is the most important thing. It changes all those systems.
Shifting to your legacy now, what's the legacy you hope to leave? Not just professionally, but also personally.
So I am Aunt Carissa. That is my legacy. I'm the aunt of so many of my nieces and nephews, and then their children. And we had a very large family, so I have a lot of those nieces and nephews. And I want them to know that they all have a place in this world. They all have a voice, and that they're all important. And in terms of who I give that to, it's sort of, I know I'm not Mother Teresa, but I'm Aunt Carissa, and I want everybody to know they have opportunity and that they have a voice and that they're important and they matter.
Before we get into our wisdom and whimsy segment, I'd like for listeners to know how they can learn more about your work and also how they can get in touch with you.
Wonderful. So Survivors First Community is a collaborative, a working group that was put together for an urgent need, and that is to assist survivors and claimants who are applying for remission funds that were made available in this historic $200+ million fund, that is available for their losses, for their economic losses and their future medical costs that were caused by being sex trafficked on Backpage.com or cityxguide.com or one of their related sites. So if you want to get a hold of us, if you want to be a resource person for that effort, Survivors First Community. You could reach me at Carissa. It's going to be confusing because my first name is spelled Carissa at survivor.lawyer. And so survivor.lawyer is where you would reach me, or Carissa at survivor.lawyer. Anyone who wants to reach out about the work with the Backpage remission and that work needs to do so pretty soon, because the deadline, like I said, is February 2nd, 2026.
Well, at the end of each episode, we ask our guests two final questions, one for wisdom and one for whimsy. It's our way of giving our audience both something to take to heart and something to smile about. Let's start with a wisdom question. What's the best piece of leadership advice you've ever received or that you'd like to pass along to others?
It goes back to my mom and her saying that we treat others how we want to be treated. It's better than anything. Second to that is, if you don't have something nice to say, right, don't say anything at all. But I think it's important that we treat each other, especially in this time that we're seeing this heightened violence and heightened anger and rhetoric that feeds fear. I think it's time that we just treat each other like we want to be treated.
And now for the fun question. If you could instantly master a completely unrelated skill, cooking, surfing, painting, you name it, what would you choose?
So I'm fascinated, like many people are, with physics, and I think quantum physics is amazing. Quantum computing, understanding quantum at any level, to me is fascinating, and I would want to understand it. And I feel like it's one that could unleash every other skill that I need.
Well, Kadisa, it has been an absolute privilege having you on Expressions of Leadership. Thank you for this conversation and for leading with such clarity and courage. Your work continues to expand what leadership means, and not just in the courtroom or in advocacy, but in everyday acts of resilience and hope.
Thank you, Michelle.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Expressions of Leadership. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe and share it with someone who might be inspired. Until next time, I'm Michelle Kawamoto Perry, encouraging you to keep turning resilience into purpose, because that's where true leadership begins. If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello? You can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins.